Welcome. Excited to see you here today. Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us for this presentation on Hurricane Prep 101. My name is Cameron Baxter Lewis. I'm the Director of Grants and Programs at the Craft Emergency Relief Fund. And throughout today's presentation, you're going to see some artists that we feature, and I'll do my best to call those out, but there's also usually a caption on each slide. This glass, ceramic, and mixed media artist is Christina Bothwell. Surplus has worked with her many times in the past, and her work is incredible. So really excited to share the artist with you as well as today's information. As I mentioned, this presentation will be recorded, so don't feel free not to capture everything via notes. You will receive a follow-up email, but thanks again for joining. And our goals today are pretty simple. I'm going to do a brief introduction to Surplus, talk about our origin story and a little bit about our grants and programs. Then we're going to look at disaster landscape, and this is something I'm very passionate about. It will look at the types and frequencies of disasters that we are starting to see in the U.S., as well as the effects that they are having on different communities. So a little bit of history on emergency management. And then we're really going to get into the meat of today's presentation by going over 5 hurricane preparedness tips. A few of those are more on the personal level, so how to protect yourself and your loved ones. And then a few are focused on your practice as an artist. And as I mentioned, we should have time at the end of the presentation for any questions, but if anything comes up during today's presentation, feel free to add it to the chat box. Another artist I want to call out is Damoon Melicone from the Big Chief of Young Seminoles. You will see his completed work in the next slide. Absolutely incredible artist as well. So to give you a little background on the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, we have been around since 1985, and the origin story is very simple. Basically, artists would go to these craft shows. They would hear about somebody who couldn't attend because they had an emergency, and that could look like anything. It could be a car accident, it could have been an illness, what have you. And they would pass around a hat and collect donations for this person. Then they would send that money to the artist. And I really think that that was a twofold approach. So obviously it had a monetary assistance, which helps with recovery, but also let that artist know that they were part of a community, and a community that really understood the precarious nature of being a craft artist and some of the financial challenges that can come along with that. So fast forward to today, we still have that signature program, which I'll talk about in a minute. We call it emergency relief grants, but we have grown. And we have grown to really consider the artist as their whole practice. So what sort of education and training, like today's presentation, would be helpful for them to protect themselves? And what sort of assistance do they need when unexpected bumps come along the way? I will also note that we advocate for craft artists at the state, local, and federal level. So we sit at the table and we hear about policies that are coming out, especially emergency management policies. And we ask questions like, well, how will this fit with a craft artist who may be self-employed, who may not have W-2 income, who may not have certain documentation that you're asking for? We try to be that voice in the room to make sure that policies are as inclusive as possible for artists. So great work that we do. Very small team, just for reference, we have around 7 or 8 folks within the organization. But as you'll see, our organization's been growing. I started in this role about 5 years ago. And at that time, we received around a third of the amount of emergency relief applications that we do today. So that program has tripled in size, and some years quadrupled in size. These are $3,000 to U.S. craft artists who've had a practice-threatening emergency. The program is open year-round. So if you are going through something that's a struggle, or you hear of an artist, please let them know about this program. as I mentioned, it has significantly grown. And there are two pretty apparent reasons for that, although I'm sure there are other factors as well. One is that about half of the grants that we're awarding are going for climate-related disasters. So we're seeing a lot more artists being affected by climate-related disasters. So about 1 out of every 2 emergency relief grants are for that specific type of emergency. And then secondly, we have really grown our geographic footprint in Puerto Rico since 2018. We've been very fortunate to make partnerships and meet incredible artists. So about a quarter of all of our emergency relief grant recipients are in Puerto Rico. So those two factors have in part influenced this program to grow. In addition to emergency relief, if you kind of flip the coin over, we also have a Get Ready program. And these are grants for artists to do any sort of activity that would protect their practice. And a lot of folks tend to think more physical mitigation measures at first. So how do I protect my studio? Do I install smoke detectors? Do I have fire extinguishers? Do I have an air filtration system? Do I do hurricane shutters? You know, kind of those physical activities are often what first come to mind. But really, this program is to prevent any future emergencies. So some activities like creating a will or estate planning or hiring a financial planner, all of those are also eligible, as well as purchasing any sort of software to archive your materials and your practice should you ever need that information for insurance or otherwise. So what I like about this program is it's very personal. Artists can really think about what they need the most. And as long as it somehow fits within preventing a future emergency, then typically it is eligible. So these are $1,000 grants. This program is open typically twice a year, so it is cyclical. If you're interested in it, definitely go to our website and sign up with your email address, and you will receive notifications well in advance of when the next cycle is going to open. Likely that will be this fall. So Get Ready program is really fun to administer because you get to see what artists are doing within their practice and what they care about. So in addition to that, I'm just going to briefly mention we have a Gifts in Kind program. These are businesses that donate directly to artists who have received emergency relief assistance. So it's an extra boost for them. An example of that would be Scott Kilns. They donate 3 kilns a year to artists who may have lost a kiln as a result of their emergency. Rio Grande donates credits on their account for their customers. So folks are able to go in and purchase materials. And Penguin Pottery does something similar where they provide gift cards. So enough about us. I'm going to move into talking about disasters. And this slide right here, which is going to be nearly impossible to read, but you kind of get a sense. These are the 2023 billion-dollar weather and climate-related events. And you can just tell by the icons that they're all different types of events that have caused billion-plus-dollar disasters. On the left-hand side, I just want to call out a few. You see Typhoon Mawar, which happened in Guam. You may have heard about all the flooding in California this past year. That happened for numerous months and was incredibly devastating. And then you see in the central part of America, you have all sorts of severe weather events that aren't just tornadoes or aren't just hurricanes, unnamed storms, but they had significant effects on the community, as well as a drought, as you could see in the lower side of the screen. So, you know, data from the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA, shows that there's been a dramatic increase in these types of events in the last 40 years. And so in this next slide, we're going to look at specific information about hurricanes. But I do want to note that since 1980, we have about $2.72 trillion worth of damages as of when this information was collected, which is a number I have a hard time wrapping my head around. But let's look specific to hurricanes. So as you can see, it's labeled tropical cyclones. not to get too nerdy on you, but the difference between whether it's labeled a cyclone or a hurricane depends on where the storm originates. All the ones that are highlighted here, we would call hurricanes, but to be safe, they have called the whole section tropical cyclones to encapsulate things that happen in the Pacific as well. But you can see that they've all happened since 2005. So in the past 20 years, the 5 most costly hurricanes, and these have been adjusted for today's income, occurred, starting with Master Ivor responded to, which was Hurricane Katrina. So according to FEMA and really all disaster experts, the number of these types of events is greatly increasing. And US hurricanes are 3 times more frequent than they were 100 years ago. And the ones that are major, meaning category 3 or above, have doubled since 1980. So you're seeing warmer climate, warmer oceans, worse hurricanes. I also want to note that we're seeing a lot more hurricanes, as I mentioned, in the Atlantic, which is affecting the northern states in the US. You have Sandy, which we all recall, but you have a number of hurricanes on this list that are starting to flood places like Maine or Vermont, and places that really haven't had as much activity as they do today. So to jump to this year's prediction, not great news I have to share, but NOAA is forecasting their highest numbers ever as of May. And typically they have a much lower chance of abnormal activity, meaning maybe they give it a 60% chance, maybe they give it a 50% chance. They have an 85% chance of probability that this year's season is going to be above normal. So they're expecting 17 to 25 named storms, 18 to 13 would become hurricanes, and 4 to 7 of those would be the major hurricanes, category 3 to 5. So on that previous slide, a lot of those were in that 3 to 5 range. So we're looking like a pretty active hurricane. But let's talk about what we can do to prepare for the event of disaster. And this is specific to hurricanes, but applicable to really all disasters. The first thing that I always worry about is, what if something happens and I'm not with my family? So like, how do I get in contact with my kids? How do I get in contact with my wife? How do I find out where they are? How do I know if they're safe? That's what a communication plan is really intended to do, is to have those conversations with the people that you love and figure out those things. So, where would you meet should there be an emergency and you couldn't go back to your house? What's your meetup point? Who are the emergency contacts that you need to connect with should something happen? Do you need to let doctors know? Do you need to let your work know? Do you need to let a school know? You want to think through those really important people. And I used to work at an organization that focused on children, and you'd be surprised how many kids don't know their parents' first and last name or their address, or no one seems to know anyone's phone number anymore. So a pro tip here that I mentioned is always throwing a luggage tag on a kid's backpack that has that sort of information. Very basic information, but if somebody found them and needed to reconnect with you, they want to know where you are. And they also may want to know what sort of medicines that kid may be on, so that they can keep them safe until you're reunited. So there's no necessarily perfect way to do a communication plan, but it is really an ongoing conversation. And the most important thing is to really practice it, because I will say from personal experience, no matter how many times we do this, I always forget our backup meetup point. I always have something else in my head. So every year I kind of revisit this with my family just to hammer that out. And it's really my fault for not having a great memory. But communication plan is something that I think is the most important step you can take. Secondly, your network. So who lives around you? Like, who are your neighbors? What sort of services do you have within your community? You want to talk to those folks. Because if I look outside my window, I have neighbors who fortunately are very handy. These would be the people I need to help me in an emergency. They have actual skills. But I also know some folks in the neighborhood who may need assistance. They may not have, they can't drive. They may not have the ability to communicate should the cell phones go down. So my responsibility would be to check on them. But you want to kind of have a sense of your network, like what sort of resources are available, and who do you really need to be looking out for? Because that's really the most important thing in the first 72 hours. Also, pro tip, consider having a disaster buddy. This always felt silly to me, but I definitely see its merit in that you can exchange emergency contacts with a fellow artist or friend. And that's an opportunity should something happen in your area and you need to tell a bunch of people you're okay. They can do that for you. They can let folks know that you're safe so that they don't worry. So just something to consider, but the people around you are really your best resource in an emergency. Number 3, this is what most folks think about, right? This is kind of the first thing. It's how do I build my kit? There's no perfect emergency kit. There are some things that you want to consider including. I would say food and water would be towards the top of that list. You want to have enough for 72 hours. There's all sorts of calculators on how much you need specific to water and food. But also think about like medicines. You want to have, cash on hand. Should technology go down and you need to purchase things. So you can tailor your kit to you. If you have pets in your home, if you have other like kids in your home, maybe you want to have a separate kit for them. Most important thing is to really have this stuff in one place that's readily accessible. Because what you don't want to happen is a disaster happens and then you're in the closet trying to find a flashlight, or you realize you don't have any water and you're trying to go to a store and the store is sold out. So it's making sure that you are safe for around 72 hours. So hopefully emergency services can help out, and then volunteer agencies can come in and set up shop and hopefully provide some more amenities. Another thing I'll add is a first aid kit. That's pretty crucial. And I love, although it's not necessary, this NOAA weather radio. So this is a battery powered radio you can turn on. It's not interesting to listen to, but it does tell you what's happening in your area. It's specific to your location, so you can know if certain roads have been affected by the disaster, or certain services are out. This can be kind of your main connection to the world. So I like having my NOAA weather radio just because I think it's helpful. But consider having a kit. Again, you don't have to have everything, but it is helpful to have some of this stuff put together. Moving out of personal preparedness into more of your studio and your home. These are some tips that I pulled, I believe, from FEMA's website on ways to mitigate some of the damage that may occur from a storm. Obviously, cutting branches that can fall down, clearing out debris, and thinking about your studio. What sort of materials do you have out that, let's say a flood happened, what would happen to your tools? What would happen to any sort of chemicals you work with? You want to have those properly stored. And I mentioned that Get Ready grant. If you decide I need storage containers, you can always apply for a Get Ready grant. That would be a totally eligible activity to do with that. Surf Plus has a resource that I'll share in just a minute. It's called our Studio Safety Guide. And this is a series of checklists you can go through within your studio. So you can look at the electrical and say, okay, is this set up safely? You can look at even leases. So do I have a lease in place with where I'm staying? Who's responsible for what? If I'm sharing my studio with somebody else, how are we addressing, should there be damages? It's got really good things to consider when setting up your studio. So just want to offer that as a helpful resource as you go through that. And then lastly, step 5, and I think I'm doing pretty good on time, is evacuate or shelter in place. So if an emergency happens very quickly, obviously something like a tornado, you may have to stay where you are. Just think about where you would go. I would go in the bathroom in the basement here. That's probably the safest place. It's away from windows. Think about where you would go, and Some people like to cut out sheeting and put it up to protect any sort of noxious gas or chemicals that may come in. You can always do those things in advance. But thinking about sheltering in place in your primary location where you are most of the time, as well as your work or wherever you find yourself most of the day. And if you're not sheltering in place and you're planning to evacuate, cool pro tip is texting the number 43362 with your zip code and the word shelter, all in caps, and that will show you any shelters that are open, I believe within a 100-mile radius. So that is a program that is administered through FEMA. Cool way to find out what's happening around you. But you want to consider having a primary route for evacuation and a secondary route. So primary route for me, it's very easy. I get on 2 main roads, but that's the most likely area to get congested or have an accident. So I have a more rural route as well to get out of town. So think about that as well. How will you evacuate and get out of town? A couple resources to share. I mentioned our studio safety guide. We also have a guide for building an estate plan, as well as a series of videos for protecting your body. We call it the 4 Wellness Makers series. All of these resources are being updated. So this fall, it's going to look very, very different than they look right now, but a lot of the content will remain the same. But if you hop on our Studio Protector now and click Get Started, it will walk you through a risk assessment so you can start honing in on how you want to develop your preparedness plan, and you can kind of hop to the appropriate resources that you want to have. It's a very cute cat, by the way. Hi. And then lastly, I'll mention one more resource, which is great, which is our business insurance guide. And this is really cool. It provides a little bit of information about each of the different types of business insurance. And really the goal is to help you as an artist build what's called a business insurance commentary. And that's just kind of a 1 to 2 page document that lays out the size and scope of your practice and helps you shop around for the best insurance. Surf Plus will be hosting a webinar August 22nd, I believe, on business insurance. And we're going to have an expert from Act Insurance with us who will answer any questions that artists have. So if you're thinking about business insurance or you have questions about your own business insurance, that's a great opportunity to ask someone and gain some clarity. So I think that's it. We're doing pretty good. I think we got 3 minutes left. So this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me should you have any questions about our grants and programs or any questions about hurricane preparedness. But I appreciate you sticking with me. And now I'm going to check out your questions. Is that radio a physical radio, or a station is a physical radio? Yeah.
Can you order it like online somewhere? Is there a special site?
Yeah. Yeah, you can even just go on Amazon and it's NOAA, NOAA weather radio. Usually like 10 to 15 bucks. And they're cool. They're just great to have around. And then you will find a station for your specific area wherever you're located that will have this constant like this is happening in this area. That's what it sounds like.
Is it in English?
It is.
Or like, would it turn to Spanish since I'm in Puerto Rico?
That's a great question. That might depend on your area. That's a really good question. Now, I'm not sure. I'm going to look that up.
I definitely would not understand weather announcements in Spanish. I do a lot in Spanish, but that's pretty specific.
Yeah, but that's a good point. I bet certain areas do have it in both languages, and they may just have different stations. That's super interesting. It's a good question. Then you had why cover doors and vents with plastic sheeting. Good question. A little bit of debate on this. Obviously, you don't want to drop oxygen levels if you're in a confined space. But sometimes people do this if they're in an area with like glass windows because they don't want chemicals coming in. So
what chemicals? Like
let's say there was, not to go too dramatic, but like a bomb or a gas attack.
Okay. So you're not talking about like hurricanes. This is like another kind of emergency.
No, I mean, for hurricanes, it would potentially keep out rain and some of the stuff that might flow in. But yeah, it's really just to keep the outside. That's the idea. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But great questions.
Yeah.
We have one more.
And I think I'm curious, just like, because we our house and studio are concrete, and like everything is, we basically live in like a fancy bunker,
Nice.
which
Yeah.
is like great for, hurricane season.
Yeah.
But just in terms of like, we have like a side of the house that's like almost completely doors and windows. It's like all glass. Like, is there something we should do? Like, is it like, in these hurricanes, like, is the wind strong enough to break the glass, or would it have to be like an impact happen? Like, are we preparing for like what kind of breakage could happen with that, and what kind of preparation should we do?
Yeah. Great questions. And where are you located?
I'm in San Juan in Puerto Rico.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Um, great question. So some folks put up what they call hurricane shutters. So they're on the outside of glass because, a hurricane is really defined as anything 74 miles and over, but something like Maria, which
Right.
was, a 4 to a 5, depending, it was 150 to 160-mile-an-hour winds. And at that point, that really can break glass. And even just a small object that's thrown at 160 miles, it can shatter.
Right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
so knowing that, I might follow up with you with some specific resources if that's helpful
Yeah,
for
I would love that.
mitigation.
Definitely. Yeah, especially our studio. It's wonderful we have so many windows, but it's like a lot of glass that I do worry about. And we moved here about 2 years ago, and we were here for Fiona in 2022.
Yeah, yeah,
And when that happened, we had quite a bit of flooding. So
yeah.
I would be curious to hear more about like preparation for flooding and what you can do to just, I guess, like I've learned from living here, you can't really stop water, but just like
Right.
what to do to help clean it. And like, if like the hurricane is happening, like we like stay where we are and the flooding just happens, and then after we go clean, or like, should we be going, like, what do you do before, during, and after? And like, what are the appropriate steps to take during an emergency like that?
Absolutely great questions. And we have resources for kind of each of those steps. So
Okay.
part of that is obviously, protecting and storing any sort of information you have about your practice. So a lot of folks keep stuff on just their physical computer, like
Okay.
their information about their practice. And we recommend storing everything in the cloud before a disaster in case.
Like meaning what? Like
Let's say they have an inventory list of everything they've sold in the past 3 years.
okay.
Or, they keep information about all their different types of tools. So if insurance claim is made, they can say, this was the tool I lost. This is how much I think it's worth. This is the receipt, kind of all those physical things.
Okay.
So backing up your documents is one crucial step. And then obviously with flood waters, they tend to kind of, depending on how your place is situated, the 4 is the place where it's going to pool, right? And so it's like lifting stuff up, and it's
Right.
making sure it's secure so it doesn't get like blown over. Those type of steps can really save things like, especially really expensive equipment.
Totally.
And then afterwards, we actually have some great tips on how to quickly protect your artwork if it's ever damaged by water. Because with water, it's all about speed, right? It's all about like protecting it quickly. Because once the water sets in, then you have mold, and then it's kind of gone. So the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, otherwise known as HENTEF, have a great resource on protecting your materials, and
Okay.
their whole kind of focus is protecting museums and archives and artists from damages after a storm.
Okay.
So I'll send you some of those resources because I think they're really helpful.
Okay, cool. Yeah, definitely. The thing that comes to mind for us, we're a ceramic studio, and like the dry materials in our glaze lab, I think, are the highest risk of, everything else is kind of like waterproof anyway because we mop. But yeah, those materials would definitely, I wrote down what you said about getting the Get Ready grant for containers, because that's actually like exactly what we need for them. So
yeah, it makes sense. And do you have a kiln too?
Yeah, we have a kiln.
Yeah, so protecting the kiln in whatever way.
Yeah, and I mean the kiln is on a stand. It's probably like 8 inches up off the floor. But the vent is on the floor, so I feel like we would need to like disconnect the vent in case of a hurricane coming, just so like, I'm like, okay, just like pretend there's gonna be like a kiddie pool in the entire studio, and like.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how you should look at it. And we even had an artist who had all of that in San Juan, but then the roof caved in and then the water came directly down on the kiln and just
Oh my
destroyed
gosh.
it. So they were, and that, yeah, that was obviously devastating because they taught ceramic classes and stuff, and it was just like, um, but yeah, those are all great questions. But it sounds like you've already given this a decent amount of thought.
Yeah, I think just like some of the like details and stuff are I want to like get those down because like it's we live in the studios in the same property, so
Okay.
it make it easier to kind of just protect everything in one swipe.
Totally.
But I definitely like want to be ready for that because like if something happens, then it's our house and the studio, so it's kind of like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing that we've heard from many artists is that they assume that their homeowners policy will protect their studio in the event of emergency because they're in the same space, but often it won't. So it'll be like, oh, that's part of your business or your practice. Like, we're not covering any of that stuff. And so I don't know what policy you have, but you may want to just look at it pretty closely to make sure that, should something happen, they're both covered.
Yeah, and that we don't have insurance on the business yet, which is
Okay, sure.
relatively new. So that's something I definitely want to look into more.
Cool. So maybe that webinar in August would be helpful for you to just kind of think through.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
If
yeah,
you could send the sign up for, I don't know if it's open yet, but
yeah, it's not even open yet, but I certainly will. It'll be like August 22nd, but I'll definitely share it with you.
Cool, thank you.
But yeah, and I mentioned the studio safety guide. That to me is helpful because I don't think necessarily when I hear electrical, I think like one thing, I'm like, oh, turn off the breaker. But that has a helpful like checklist on like, should a flood happen, what do you need to do to protect all your equipment and your studio from floodwaters destroying your electrical outlets, right? And so that list to me is really helpful to walk through because it has a lot of information I wouldn't have considered when I was trying to protect from like a flood. But yeah, but thanks for joining today. I appreciate you sticking with me.